what was more challenging for you, surviving buds or breaking addiction?
It is a good question, and I think we can probably break these different scenarios down throughout our discussion today. But my quick response to your question was buds was far more challenging, interestingly, than my sobriety journey over the past couple of years. I think there's a lot of nuances as to why that we can get into, but that's my response.
Yeah, why was it?
I think obviously the choice to transition from being a financial analyst after college to joining the Navy and trying out for arguably the most challenging special operations training and selection program in the world in and of itself, and then going through that journey, going down range and all those things build a certain degree of mental fortitude that, when leveraged properly, obviously have the opportunity to bleed into all of the areas of our life from that point forward, whether it's strengthening your marriage and other relationships, to being a more present parent, to dealing with the ups and downs and stresses of entrepreneurship, to, in my case, also battling my addiction with alcohol. We'll just call it what it is. And then overcoming that. And the catalyst of that was the passing of my father, which forced me to reconsider where my priorities fell and things that were standing in the way as obstacles to having a healthy marriage, being a present father, being the best possible CEO and founder that I could be for my company. And one of the things upon reflection that I discovered, obviously, was that my relationship with alcohol was certainly standing in the way of really optimizing in all of those key categories.
So it's interesting, like you didn't get out of college or graduate high school and you're like, oh, I want to go in the military. You went from like finance world to going to being a Navy SEAL?
Yeah, obviously. Isn't that the normal trajectory?
No.
Now, I'll give you the backstory for context, just, for the folks, obviously, watching, listening. It wasn't an overnight choice, obviously, but I grew up in Dallas and did my undergraduate education at Southern Methodist University, or SMU, not because it was in Dallas, but of the schools I looked at, it was a good fit for their undergrad business program. And during my time there, I met a young gentleman by the name of Matt, who we were in the same fraternity together. He was a year behind me in school, and he was one of these individuals who had a lifelong childhood dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. Now, granted, the timing was interesting because this was right before 9/11. So I met him a couple of years before 9/11. I then graduated. He was a senior, and his dedication to this vision only strengthened over time. And when I graduated, and we had become good friends. And when I graduated, I was working as a financial analyst, long hours, but still managed to squeeze in time to train with him. So for me, it's a great way to find time and make the time to stay fit, have an accountability partner, but also simultaneously help a good friend prepare for this ridiculous, arduous journey that laid before him, knowing that the likelihood of his success, nobody thinks of it in these terms, but the likelihood of his success is very low. And so nights and weekends, we'd start training together. And by the nature of that training regimen, we were spending so much time together, having deep dialogue about the implications of this journey, which obviously piqued my interest. And I started reading the available books at the time. There are many more now, obviously, about the history of naval special warfare, from our founding forefathers of the underwater demolition teams in World War II to Vietnam and Korea and the other conflicts that obviously naval special warfare has been involved in. And I became fascinated with the history and the culture of high performance, and that growing fascination, coupled with the extremely tedious nature of my entry-level financial analyst position, led me to the ultimate decision to leave that career behind, at least for the time being. And he and I joined the Navy together. Actually, before that, we moved up to a little town called Crested Butte, Colorado. We trained at high altitude up there for about 7 months. And then we came back, enlisted in the Navy, and the rest is history. So.
Wow, man, what a story, and what bravery for you to to kind of do that. And I would love to get into like the relatability between what you went through as a SEAL and what my audience tends to struggle with at times. And we all struggle with mental toughness, adversity, fear, anxiety. Buds is known to be incredibly challenging, tough. People don't always get through it. What was like the most brutal, hardest moment of SEAL training that nearly broke you? And how did you keep going even though you didn't want to?
It's really a fascinating social experiment, if you will. Obviously, it's heavily physical. It's even more so a psychological and cognitive journey. And over the years, as you can imagine, especially post 9/11, Naval Special Warfare has invested years and millions of dollars in research and data collection, trying to better identify the mental, cognitive, emotional, and physical attributes of students more likely to successfully navigate this training pipeline. Because ultimately, the goal, at least had been at a certain point in time, to grow the ranks of the SEAL teams. And while we can't make training easier, if anything, it's technically become probably more competitive over time. Uh, the data still, it shows us a lot of unique insights, but we still graduate the same percent per class almost every single time, obviously with some subtle differences there. But it's a different journey for every single student that enters this program. It doesn't matter if you are a D1 athlete. It doesn't matter what your academic background look like. And from what we see on documentaries and in the movie, it doesn't outwardly look like a very diverse group of people. But ultimately, it really is a very diverse group of individuals from different, economic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, different geographical backgrounds and where they come from. But for me, it wasn't specifically one evolution. Like some people really struggle maybe with the timed runs where they thrive in the water, or they struggle with the obstacle course, because there's all these different evolutions and tests and trials and even pass fail evolutions where sometimes individuals struggle specifically with one thing or the other. Where for me, it was really just the overarching stress and anxiety, the fear of failure. And keep in mind, intertwine the academic side of it. It's not necessarily something I struggled with, but combining getting tortured all day with also having to study, take tests, do homework. You're going on very limited sleep. You have injuries, illnesses, all these different things. For me, it was just the overall anxiety of the program itself. It wasn't one specific evolution, but I kind of equated to that philosophy around the Sunday blues and how people stress about Monday. Imagine that on steroids times 1,000 every day. So you go to bed stressed out, you only have a few hours of sleep, and then you wake up, in a state of deep anxiety, knowing that at any given moment, any given day, that could be the end of your journey.
And then how did you calm yourself down to get back to a point of equilibrium after that training was over to be able to like go and be a Navy SEAL? Because I imagine there was a process there, right? Where you're like going from a place where you're constantly on edge. Am I going to get cut? Am I getting sent home? So now it's like, all right, you're in, like, time to go to war, right? Like, what was that transition period like?
I think I really realized some of the tools that I utilized, the mental tools I utilized to get through those moments of deep anxiety or fear of failure later on, really kind of packaging them in a way to say like, all right, this is actually what I was doing. And this is how you can actually utilize that type of mental exercise to overcome any type of stress or anxiety. And I think that not just in my experience, but the students that are successful in this program can do two things simultaneously. They maintain a long-term emotional connection to the mission, to the vision, to that even obsession and that idea of being not just a general special operator, but a deep need and desire to be a naval special operator, to be a SEAL, not just serving in the military, but something that you don't want to do, but for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, you have to do it. So long-term connection and emotional ties to that ultimate goal, while not just trying to compartmentalize the pain, the suffering, and the stress, but actually really leaning into it and reframing it in a way that this is a necessary part of the journey. Every single person who's worn the trident has gone through this exact same developmental process, if you will. It's no different for everyone. for anyone who's gone through it. So with that understanding and being able to mentally connect to those two things at the same time, I think that's one of the key ways that I know that I was successful in this endeavor. And by the grace of God, I didn't have any significant injuries that, forced me to be rolled back to another class or anything like that. So I wanted to get through it as quickly as possible, like everyone, but doing those two things, I think, and if you apply that to any area of your life, whether it's starting a company or, building a great marriage and being a great parent, maintaining connectivity to the long-term ultimate outcome, while also just leaning into the inevitable obstacles and stresses that come with achieving anything great.
I think people look at SEALs and they have the utmost respect for what you've done and what you've done for our country, and also have a hard time relating to like how you deal with fear or how you deal with anxiety, because there's this notion that you're just wired differently. Like it's like the top one out of it's like the top 0.0001% of people could handle like things like you and others have gone through. How does like the stress and anxiety of being a SEAL, like how does that relate to everyday life? Like how could you kind of marry those two things together where your experience with dealing with fear and stress, like how can the everyday person like take away certain things from that?
I think in its simplest form, it's really about taking action. So think about anything associated with accomplishing something great. There's going to be obstacles, there's going to be micro failures along the way. There's going to be stress, there's going to be anxiety with anything. Again, like we're achieving something in your professional career, your personal life, an athletic feat, whatever it is, anything great is very difficult to do. And so there's always going to be fear associated with tackling those types of challenges in any area of our life. But what I've found, and there's endless amounts of empirical research and psychology that shows that this is true, is that instead of spending so much time ruminating over the what ifs and the possible outcomes and the bad things that could happen, one interesting data point is that only about 3% of the things that we fear actually come to fruition. And of that 3%, only a small fraction are as bad as we think they're going to be. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, and we'll put that off to the side for a minute. But the other thing, I recently heard Jocko say this on a podcast or, a post or something, but really it's about taking action. He said, go. Of course, it is true. Jocko, since his answer was go. But to expand on that,
It's different than good, right? And that what he makes
good. It's in a similar, you add a few words and beautiful. But in that similar philosophy, one thing that I think we all find upon reflection is that the faster we take action along with some calculated risk and some, ideation on what the obstacles are going to be, the more we realize, A, what we're fearing is not as scary as we think it's going to be. B, it is actually doable and we can accomplish it in a meaningful way. And the steps to get there, as long as we break it down into bite-sized chunks, are actually quite achievable. I mean, that's one thing that you'll see is the more we intentionally push the boundaries of our comfort zone in key areas of our life that matter, the broader that area becomes. And things that used to be seemingly impossible can become part of your everyday life. So it's really just about taking action, getting into it, experiencing both the joys and the fears of whatever that activity might be. And then as you do that, you become more comfortable being uncomfortable, to use that terminology. And then you expand from there. Then you keep moving the goalpost back and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again. And that process builds the mental fortitude necessary to achieve greater things, I think, in any area of your life.
I think I've heard Goggins say, which I know you know him very well. He said something like, the way you get better at managing stress is to like do the things that work when you're actually going through stress or something like that, or learning how to do it when you're going through stress. And I related to that because a lot of my stress reduction techniques I learned while I was incarcerated. So I learned it in real time. And it just seems like that's what you learned as well. Do you think that that's why people like yourself and other SEALs and other people who have spent a lot of time in the military are so effective at communicating about stress reduction and how to manage things like anxiety and fear because you've had to like learn how to do it in real time. It's not like you were sitting, in at your desk at like 7 a.m. on a Monday morning sipping coffee, like doing breath work. Like you had to do it under an immense amount of stress.
I think one of the tools that I've used to, it's never perfect and we're all human and suffer from the human condition. There's not a day that goes by that I might not have some sort of sprinkling of fear, anxiety, or even imposter syndrome. That's just a daily process as a founder and entrepreneur. But one thing that I've done kind of equates, at least initially, to some of the first phases of mission planning, really is one, identifying, for example, a core either goal and objective or an obstacle associated with that objective. But let's take goal setting as an example. I want to do X. So let's say I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to go build a company. Well, then I need to identify, obviously, not just the resources that I'm going to need to be successful in that endeavor. The second part of that is identifying in a very clear, measurable way, what are the obstacles that are going to stand in the way of achieving that goal, including the things that are going to cause me a lot of stress and anxiety. Usually those things are going to be stuff that I don't like doing, but that are a necessary part of the journey. So what are those obstacles that I'm going to face, or those necessary parts of that function that I have to do but hate doing and cause me stress, cause me anxiety, and really lean into those things, learn how to do them better, get comfortable with those activities. One example, just so we can make it a little bit more specific. Ironically, even though I was a finance major in undergrad and studied this in grad school as well, one of the parts of entrepreneurship previously that I didn't like spending a lot of time in was the numbers, sifting through the data, the financial data, the P&L, and making more data-driven decisions based on the financials. I wanted to spend more time, in sales and business development, marketing, branding, relationship building. Whereas if you want to be a good CEO and a good founder, all the decision-making really should be driven by data, largely financial data. So it wasn't until I got some good feedback and some mentorship and guidance, said, hey, this stuff makes you cringe, but it's a necessary part of the journey. So why not lean into it? And the more you lean into it, the more it becomes extremely comfortable. You might even start to enjoy it. And that was absolutely true. This is feedback that I got from coaches and mentors, also feedback I got through anonymous employee surveys about being more strategic and data-driven in my decision-making. And so that's what I did. Deprioritized other things and leaned into the things that caused me a lot of stress and anxiety. And now they don't. So really just to package that up a little bit more clearly, identifying those things and what are the real root causes of our anxiety, and then using that insight to tackle those challenges head on.
What was it like transitioning from like the fear of losing your life to like the everyday fears of business and relationships and life being a civilian?
One thing that I've found that's interesting about the battlefield, the literal battlefield in combat is, and not by any means dismissing the gravity of those types of situations and scenarios. But it's in a lot of ways more simple, sort of. You'd have to obviously put that in context as far as the mission is very clear. It's tangible. Everybody's totally aligned on what we're trying to accomplish day in and day out. Whereas that transitional period, and then for me, transitioning from the teams to grad school, and then immediately from there, the only thing I've ever done has been a tech entrepreneur. So I dove headfirst into entrepreneurship. After that, again, you see team guys go in, one of several directions after leaving the teams, and largely, and probably not surprisingly, entrepreneurship is a very common path because you think about the culture and even structure of the SEAL teams, it's very entrepreneurial. It's very decentralized. We thrive with a centralized strategy, but really execute in a very decentralized capacity, just like being, a founder or an entrepreneur. And so, I think obviously there's a lot of direct ties that translate seamlessly over to being an effective entrepreneur. But at the same time, in a totally different environment. My transitional period was strategic. And I think that what we've seen with the guys and gals who transition successfully out of the military, they start planning that transition, probably sometimes years before they even get out. Whether that's going back to school for a sort of career path and getting some mentorship and guidance and doing the research, putting in the work, getting degrees or certifications while they're still in. I've got a couple guys who work for me that did that. They started transitioning 4 years before they actually transitioned out. And so that actually creates a roadmap that's uh, more strategic. It's more seamless as opposed to leaving a lot of open time to wonder what the path needs to be. So it wasn't by any means less stressful, but at the same time, there was clear direction there for what I wanted to execute.
I would say people look at people like yourself, Goggins, Jocko. I mean, a lot of the people that have served in the military have been in elite status and stuff, and they're like, that guy is tough. That guy has what it takes. He's got a lot of mental toughness. And I think what can be misunderstood from people is they think that you have to be like hard shelled, and just very quiet, not saying much in order to be considered tough, right? You don't let things get to you. Like, how do you define what mental toughness actually is? And like, what's like a hard truth that you think people need to understand about it?
It's a great question and a pretty fascinating dichotomy between what people perceive to be mental toughness and fortitude, and they see the figures out there like Goggins and Jocko and that general persona. But those guys included, what you see actually in special operations, in that community, in that culture, but down to the individual is actually a high degree of emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that, of course, and the most important categories of EI I'm referencing there, a high degree of self-awareness mixed with a high degree of humility and a willingness to be in a continuous state of improvement. Most of those people, and anybody you would bucket into the most quote unquote successful people in the world, are lifelong learners. And that's where I really think that mental fortitude comes from, and the toughest people out there, but definitely how people thrive in the special operations community is through high self-awareness, high degrees of humility, and a deep, not just willingness to learn and accept constructive feedback, but a deep desire for it. Like it's a necessity. I've seen this in another one of colleagues at my company, former Marine colonel, Top Gun fighter pilot, Top Gun instructor. So the best of the best of the best of the best. And the first time we worked together on one of our big client programs in a deep management consultative scenario, we were of course debriefing after the end of the first day, with this client, the senior leaders in this organization, and we sat down to debrief, and they take it to a whole different level. It was like I saw this deep need in him for me to give him not praise but constructive feedback. He took his glasses off. He's like, "What do you got for me?" Like pen and paper in hand. I was like, "Well, I was sugarcoating. I was like, I think you did great. I think that really resonated with this, with that." He's like, no, forget all that. Like, what do I need to improve on? Like, where did you see some of the gaps? How can I articulate this better? Here's some things that I think I could have improved on. That type of mindset that drives true mental toughness, as opposed to that kind of tough guy exterior. And frankly, usually that's wildly inauthentic. That comes from a place of insecurity, as opposed to actual someone being secure with not just their manhood or manliness or toughness, but being secure with their weaker areas, both mentally and physically, and where they need to grow and develop.
Yeah, it's like true confidence, right? Is being able to have enough humility to understand that you don't know everything. I think I saw it might have been the same video or same interview that Jocko said that, where he was like, you have to understand that you don't know everything. And humility is a huge part of self-confidence and being tough, because you understand that like you have to acquire skills and knowledge in order to keep getting better and grow as an individual, which I think is going to be the ultimate thing for people to be able to survive in life. Is there any like skills that you like learned specifically as a SEAL outside of like dealing with fear that you still use in everyday life?
I think one skill that I would always go back to, whether it's in business, in my personal life, is spending time, whether it's daily or with some degree of consistency, whatever time-bound nature you want to put to it. But for me, it's daily reflection. So almost like a daily debrief. So I'm a big proponent. It's almost cliche, so I'm hesitant to even mention it, but a big proponent from a well-designed early morning routine. I mean, it's not like some new thing. This has been going on since Marcus Aurelius and before him. And, philosophers of old have always touted the importance of an early morning, very specific, regimented, purposeful routine to prepare our minds and our bodies for the day ahead. But also important in that, if you're going to have a very disciplined morning routine, having a disciplined evening routine is even more important sometimes. But also, and if you've ever read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography or studied individuals like that, of the great history makers of the world, a lot of them had similar philosophies around the end of the day reflection. So, and whether you're reflecting on, the big wins and successes and joys of the day, or reflecting on things that didn't go well that day, just typical debriefing methodology, what went well, what didn't go well, how did I react, and trying to be, if you're capturing it or journaling this or just reflecting mentally, trying to be very specific in the impacts, the emotions that it drew out, the behaviors that you noticed in yourself, especially when it relates to things that cause fear or caused anxiety or caused depression or caused uncertainty, or you're feeling some of that imposter syndrome set in, based on the challenges that lay ahead. Really, again, reflecting on the root cause and identifying. And one thing I found in that sort of debriefing reflection period, once you do the root cause analysis, you really kind of break it down in a way you're like, why am I even really worried about that? That's not a big, scary, audacious thing that I should really be spending any emotion or energy on at all. And so going through that process on a regular basis, daily if needed, is a tool that I've used to really break things down into a more digestible manner, where those big, scary things that are causing anxiety aren't that big a deal. The other thing that comes out of that process is you realize sometimes you think the root cause of this piece of stress, fear, or anxiety is one thing, but once you go through that mental exercise, it's actually driven by something completely different. Sometimes something seemingly unrelated to what you're initially tying it to.
One of the things that, SEALs are known for, and you wrote a book about this, is learning how to embrace the suck, right? And I've built a whole platform on people dealing with adversity and different themes within that. And I think I did that because people struggle with this, Brent. They struggle when life throws them curveballs. They struggle when they're feeling overwhelmed, and it leads to poor decisions. How can people calm themselves down? How can people learn to embrace that massive sense of discomfort when life is throwing them something unexpected, so they can move through it efficiently and they don't end up wrecking their life?
Yeah, actually, I was just in a conversation with an executive from one of our client companies this morning on this exact topic. It wasn't really a coaching moment, but it kind of became one, a two-way coaching moment. And we were talking about how, and again, look at the data. It all comes back the same on how we make decisions as humans. It's largely from a percent standpoint. I don't remember exactly, but let's say 80-20, just for simplicity. We make most of our decisions 80% on emotion, or at least emotion driven, and 20% or probably less. So if I'm getting this exact data or percentage incorrect, that's on me. But let's just say for simplicity, it's 20% or less on actual data or facts. And so with that understanding, we realize that the importance of taking that tactical pause, not trying to avoid knee-jerk reactions to things, especially big things that require us to make better decisions. We need to move more slowly. Kind of that slow is smooth, smooth is fast training methodology in the SEAL teams applies to also how we make key decisions, whether it's as a leader at work, as a leader at home, in our marriage, as a parent, on key projects, things we're working on, is making sure that we're taking enough time. And again, a tactical pause on the battlefield could be a few seconds. Off the battlefield, gosh, it could only be 2 minutes, but at the same time, taking enough time to reflect on what's actually happening in that moment, being self-aware enough to realize the emotions that are being triggered in us and why, and then trying to access some degree of feedback or data to make an informed decision, as opposed to your point, the reckless, knee-jerk, emotion-driven decisions that we often make that can totally destroy our lives in the short term, but sometimes in the very long term. So again, trying not to react so in such an emotion-driven way to things that key up those emotions, but also trying to take a little bit of time or a little bit of extra time than we normally would to gather either some feedback or some data or some type of insight that'll help us make better informed decisions that are not emotional.
Speaking of decisions, what was your battle with addiction like?
It was a gradual process. And I think this is actually the first time I've actually articulated as addiction. So there we go. And I've always kind of dismissed it as, well, probably like drank a little bit too much, or, used alcohol a little bit too much as a crutch or self-medication. I've never really framed it as addiction, but let's call it what it is. And this is something that obviously a lot of people struggle with, but from my perspective, alcohol was something that for a long, long time I leaned on to self-medicate, whether it's, from my experiences on the battlefield, combined with the stresses of entrepreneurship, which obviously when you're a founder, everything's on you. Especially if you go out and you raise capital and you have a board of directors and there's expectations and there's things that are out of your control. And then mix that in with the fact that there's uncertainty and unpredictability and ambiguity. And you're the sole provider for your family, all these things intertwined. I was using alcohol, obviously, which is really ironic because if you obviously break it down, alcohol destroys your health. It causes more anxiety. It's not an effective tool. Big shock to everyone. I know it's not an effective tool to alleviate anxiety. It causes more anxiety the next day. Compounding effect. It makes you less productive, as do drugs and other things like that. But for me, it was, an overabundant use of alcohol. And then a couple of years ago, when my father passed away unexpectedly, I just happened to be in Dallas, where I grew up, on a business trip. And just by the grace of God was in Dallas the day he had a fall. Fall caused a brain bleed. He was on heart medication. That heart medication, the blood thinner specifically, caused a brain bleed that was inoperable. 15 hours later, he was gone. But the loss of key people in our lives, especially a parent or, God forbid, a child, obviously, and even for people who are, for lack of a better way of putting it, have been close to death and lost and experienced the horrors of the battlefield, losing someone pivotal in your life naturally causes us to reflect, we all do it differently, on our own mortality and what are we achieving, and are we having, pouring ourselves into the right relationships? Where are we wasting our time? Where are we spending time and energy and emotion on stuff that doesn't matter at all? And so I went through that natural process. And one of the things that I identified was that alcohol in many ways was radically impeding progress in key areas, such as having the best possible marriage that I could, being fully present with my children in key moments, and being a busy founder and entrepreneur. I travel a lot and I work a lot. So those moments that we do have are critical, and we have to be all in those moments. And alcohol was obviously an impediment to that. And also just a general impediment to my focus and productivity as an entrepreneur. So I made the decision one day to stop drinking, eliminate it from my life forever, unequivocally, no moderation. And it's been almost 2 years. And it's been, for me, again, I don't preach this outwardly, but for me, it's been an absolute game changer in every category.
What was some of the mental blocks you had, or battles around quitting?
One key mental block was telling myself that I don't have a problem with it. I just really enjoy drinking. That was one obvious one. I was like, no, I don't have a problem. I just like drinking. So it's not a big deal. But on a more serious note, I think it's really just the fear of what does my life look like without alcohol? I really, I leaned on alcohol so much over such a long period of time, where even though I've achieved certain degrees of success or what people might categorize as success, you know, uh, imagine also some of the damage that I'm doing in areas of my life, or imagine some of the things that I'm not accomplishing because of using alcohol. And so, but still, even though you can reflect on those things, there's still a fear of that thing that's been such a big part of your life, not having it there. What's going to fill that void? So I think in large part, it was the fear of not having that anymore. And like, what am I going to do without that? Whether it's in the social environment or using it as as a stress reliever. Again, obviously it's not actually a stress reliever. Um, but again, going back to conversation previously, one of the best ways to mitigate fear is just to take action down that path. And what I realized almost immediately with there, it didn't cause any fear in those areas. And for whatever reason, again, through the grace of God, I truly believe, for whatever reasons, he made it very easy for me. And I didn't struggle. And I'm not saying that in a boastful way by any means. I'm saying that with a great degree of humility and also regret. God, imagine if I had done that sooner. And so the journey has been powerful in a sense of realizing that, anybody can battle addiction in similar ways. And there's no shame in asking for help. In fact, you should ask for help, and you should have a mentor and a guide, whether it's a formal program or not. And align yourself with other people. That's one thing that I found is upon reflection, I was like, look at all these other people in my life that I deeply respect, former team guys, entrepreneurs, people who had also already made that choice. This is something I deeply believe in. If you're going to go tackle an audacious goal, find someone in your life or someone you don't even know yet who's done that same thing and seek guidance from them. And so I did that same thing, and I aligned myself and even started spending more time with people who had already eliminated alcohol from their lives, people especially I deeply respect, who achieved great success as entrepreneurs, who had phenomenal careers in the SEAL teams, and learned from them about their journey with sobriety. And that was a huge source of strength and confidence in that path by seeing, how healthy and happy they are and how they're thriving in all these different areas after they made that difficult choice.
I know you've connected with Sean Ryan, right? And he's been sober for a few years, I believe, as well.
He's one of the guys that I poured into about that journey.
That's awesome. I mean, watching his journey has been really cool, just to see him, his evolution, is getting into recovery and then finding God, and that whole thing has been really inspiring to watch.
Yeah, but also to see that he's one of those people that, and not surprisingly, but there is a purpose behind everything he does. There's a strategy, there's an intent. And that's why I think he's been so successful with the podcast in his career. But also, one thing that I've seen has been a really powerful evolution just in the culture, of the military and in our veterans, especially amongst men, is that while in the past, for example, leaning into and being vocal about things like sobriety or faith, these were not things we really talked about much, like back in the day. Those were, I don't want to categorize those as, well, people might have thought of those as, things that weren't manly or things that were, showed weakness. But obviously, as we know, those are sources of strength. And seeing a lot of guys like Sean out there being very open and vocal about their faith, about their sobriety, about the obstacles, inherent with those journeys, but also the power that, that journey has had in their life in a very positive way. I think has really been a source of inspiration for millions, but also opened up the door for others to be more vocal and really lean into things like their faith and sobriety. And even if they were like sober curious, well, maybe I'll give that a shot. And then they realize, oh my God, this is impacting every area of my life in a very positive way.
Are you familiar with Damon Friedman, Shield of Faith missions?
I don't think I am, actually.
Well, anyway, one of my best friends was a Force Recon Marine, and they did this movie called Surrender, I believe it was called. And they interviewed a bunch of spec op guys about how finding God like saved their life from like PTSD and stuff. And it was just a really like moving. It was really hard for me to watch because like watching my friend in there and like the stuff he went through, after war. Um, but I didn't know if there would be a connection, there between, what you just talked about and what they were doing. But yeah, I mean, it's like,
Well, I'm sure there is.
well, and I think when people see people like yourself and Sean, they think that, you know, nothing phases you guys, right? Or, that there's never times where you feel like you need to surrender and ask for help. But in reality, like we're all human and we all struggle with the same things from time to time. And it's really cool to see that people like him and yourself are humanizing that for people.
Yeah, again, your point is really important about the fact that we often put, you and I included, we put others on this pedestal that oftentimes they deserve to be on in some capacities, but they are also humans. They deal with the same stresses and anxieties and fears and relationship challenges and obstacles at work that we all do, maybe in different capacities or in different environments. But it's important to understand that we all again suffer from that human condition. Nobody is immune to it, and nobody escapes it. So might as well be vocal about it, and hopefully we can positively impact others along the way.
Speaking of the human condition, I think one of the things that people struggle with is not taking action because they're not motivated. What's the hack around that?
First is understanding that motivation isn't real. It's a fleeting emotion. That's why when people say, "Oh, you do some motivational speaking," I immediately correct them. I'm like, I'm not a motivational speaker. It's not even where I spend the majority of my time, but also this philosophy around meeting motivation. True motivation, and I'm not the first person to say this, obviously, comes from self-discipline. Just again, I know Jocko talks about this, but this is something that's been a known philosophy and methodology from the ancient Stoics to modern day, around really understanding where motivation comes from. And motivation actually comes deeply from a high degree of accountability, personal accountability, and a high degree of self-discipline. And so when people feel that general lack of motivation or lack of malaise or the inability to really just get up and take action towards whether it's a project or a career path that they're trying to go down, or something in their personal life, or mending a relationship, or getting out of a toxic relationship, whatever it is, all of that stems from fear. Any type of hesitation, any type of lack of motivation generally comes from some type of fear of what those consequences are going to be. Fear of change, fear of transformation, and the added obstacles that will come with transformation. But again, same philosophy applies. You start taking incremental steps towards achieving that goal, or doing that thing, or overcoming that obstacle, and it gradually gets easier and easier and easier. And then the next time you have to do that, you have a lower degree of fear and a bias toward action.
Is there anything you do during moments where your mind's telling you to quit and not do things, but you have to get it done, or you just push?
Yeah, no, like every day. Well, one thing actually, just to be totally real, that I've been struggling with, I've referenced it a couple times, but it's real. And actually, I first really started thinking and talking about this principle of imposter syndrome with one of my buddies who was a Green Beret. And he was on a very different but similar path, in the sense after he transitioned, it was, entrepreneurship and dabbling in this, that, and the other thing, but also battling with a pretty hefty dose of imposter syndrome. And just for reference, obviously, imposter syndrome, we all usually have it in some capacity, especially when we're trying new things. But really, it's that sense of fear or foreboding that, God, what am I doing? How am I even doing the thing that I'm doing? I am not qualified for this. I am not smart enough for this. I'm not physically capable enough for this thing, whether it's in sports or, academia or professional lives or other types of personal goals. It's a normal thing. Some people experience it more than others, but I believe, upon deeper reflection, though, at least in my experience, that if you are having a sense of imposter syndrome related to certain, big goals you're chasing or obstacles you're facing, I believe that shows you deeply care about the thing you're doing. And B, I think that it shows that you are pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone. You are on a path to pursue something lofty, something meaningful, something potentially powerful in your life and hopefully the lives of others, enough to where you're having some doubts. You're second guessing a little bit, which I think is just a general healthy mental result of, pushing those boundaries, in a meaningful way. So it's something that I've been struggling with more, but I'm on a new and different path, as an entrepreneur right now. Last year, we raised a bunch of money and we've transitioned from management consulting at Accelerate to becoming an enterprise software company. So a pretty radical shift and going down a path that, even though my previous companies were tech, they were not SaaS, which is different trajectory, requires a hell of a lot more money. And so you're always raising capital. You're always chasing, new customers, building the team, all the things inherent with building a company. But at the same time, this has been a new, uncomfortable path for me. It's been very exciting, but at the same time, I think that's where that's coming from. But I see that as a good, if I'm questioning or having some of that doubt, that means I'm pushing the boundaries enough to where, you know, potentially pursuing something meaningful.
People often have a hard time with identity and like reinvention. And if they switch from one job to the next, they have a hard time letting that go, or even like with a plan in life they thought they were going to have, and then it goes sideways and they have to pivot and they have a hard time like staying on that path, not going back to the old path. What's your relationship been like with identity, going from the seal, which, I think a lot of people like carry that with them for the rest of their life, and rightfully so. But still, I feel like if you don't evolve and kind of transition in a proper way, that can have, unexpected side effects as well. So what's that journey been like for you?
The journey's been quite interesting. And actually, for the new book I have coming out December 2nd called All In, I really dive deep into the research and the behavioral science behind identity, but more importantly, intentional identity transformation tied to either pursuing lofty goals or making big transformations in your life or overcoming addiction, whatever those big things might be, regardless of the obstacles tied to those things. One thing we'll find in our lives as we transition from one thing to another, whether it's different careers or different paths, is that while not straying from the core of who we are or our values, assuming we've spent some time identifying what those core values are, I do think it's not just healthy, but also sometimes imperative to go through constant transformations of our identity, of our mindset, and really thinking about not what do I need to do to achieve this goal, but who do I need to become to be the type of person that would be successful in that endeavor. That's something I think it's a reframing, obviously in its simplest form, but it's a very powerful reframing, because instead of just identifying the tactical nature of the things I need to do or the steps I need to take to achieve a specific goal, thinking about, who am I as a person now and who do I need to become, to be thinking differently about this thing, to be a better leader or a different type of leader, to be successful in that endeavor. That really goes into not just kind of allowing these external forces to transform our identity, but being very specific, intentional, and strategic even in going down that path of identity transformation, which requires us to do some reflection on where we spend our time, who we spend our time with, and what types of specific learning and development do we go through, and is it by design? Is it intentional? And again, kind of going back to the philosophy that we are the sum of the people we surround ourselves with. One key thing we need to do if we're trying to go down a new path or achieve a lofty goal is start surrounding yourself with people who have done something similar or had great success in that regard. So one of the things that I did when making that determination, it was years in evolution, but ultimately coming to that decision, for example, to accelerate from traditional management consulting to incorporating enterprise software products and solutions, was I need to spend more time with successful software entrepreneurs, people who've built big companies, people who've raised a lot of capital, people who have started from zero and gone to an exit of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, to really see like who they are, how they lead, how they think about technology, how they think about the culture of their organization. How did they get from A to Z? And so if I don't spend time with those types of people, there's a much less likelihood that I'll be successful with just trying to figure it out, or it'll take a lot longer. And so that's just one example, but that's part of how we think about some at least small incremental transformations in our identity, is spending time with the people who have, and I mean, people who have a positive impact, obviously, in our lives. Because the same is true to spending time with the wrong people, as you and I know, just from things in our lives. I mean, you spend time with the wrong people, your identity will start to shift in a negative way. So the same is true to spending time with the right people, especially if you feel they could be good coaches, mentors, or at least even just spending time around them will have a positive impact on the thing you're trying to achieve or the goal that you're pursuing.
The thing that so many people struggle with is this idea of not being able to let go of old friends. You see this a lot in the addiction community. What advice do you have for people to let go of old friends so that they can make new ones and in turn be able to like transform their life?
It's a huge premise in the entire all-in philosophy of this new book. And I spent a lot of time looking at this and studying it and researching and reflecting just how this, has evolved in my own life. But, if upon reflection, we all understand that really, this philosophy of going all in means narrowing our focus and really prioritizing in key areas of our life. And that goes into the people we spend our time with. And really, ultimately, for those of us to find true happiness, true success, true fulfillment, however we want to define those in our own personal and professional ways, is that we really only have time for a few key deep relationships. We only have time for a few key professional pursuits. We only have time for a few key personal goals and pursuits. We can't be chasing all things all the time and every shiny object, and the good idea fairy comes in and visits us. We're, we should do that thing. We should do that thing. Then we're spread so thin that it's just an exercise in constant mediocrity. Whereas when it comes to our relationships with people, looking especially at who's adding value to my life and who is detracting value from my life, even if they were people initially who were your best friend or you were super close with, people evolve, people change, they grow apart. And frankly, it is imperative for us, especially if we want to pour ourselves, our time and our energy into the things that are the most meaningful to us, we absolutely have to eliminate key relationships from our life, the ones that don't add value, or more importantly, the ones that are detracting value, causing toxicity, the people that drag you down, the naysayers, the people that don't lift you up. They got same thing. You see that in an organization or in a team. It's the same thing, that people who aren't either adding value or they're detractors from value, they're anti-change, they're toxic, they have to be eliminated. So the same thing applies in our personal.
It's not a mindset shift that people need to make, but it's just a reality that people have to face. And one of the things that I'll always say is you got to surround yourself with people who have common futures and not common pasts. And you got to look at like, where is it that you're trying to go in life? What are you trying to achieve? And like, who can you spend time with? And I know you just touched on that. And you have to let go of the people that aren't going in that same direction and understand that like those people had a choice as well. I'm sure there's people in your life that you wanted to stick around, you wanted to have a relationship with, but you're also like, man, like I'm growing and you're not. Like you're making that same decision, right? And it's a hard reality to understand. We've talked about a lot when it comes to, how to become like mentally unstoppable, facing fear, anxiety, doing the thing. What's another like mindset thing that you think is dangerous for people that they're believing right now that's keeping them stuck?
Yeah, I do want to touch one thing. Obviously, we're not talking about leaving people on the battlefield. We want to lift people up. We want to help them, if they need help. So I didn't want to sound like it's just like, oh, screw everybody. Like it's not a selfish notion. I'm just talking about mainly people who are dragging you down, people who are creating toxicity in your life. Those are the people that we need to move away from. But I think too that The other thing that, we see a lot of, right now, and I know we always say, well, in these crazy times we live in, like times are always crazy. There's always something going on in the world, and there's always multiple bad things going on in the world since the beginning of time. So it's just how we frame it and how we look at it, and how it impacts our lives personally or professionally. But um, I think too that a lot of people just need to get back to the core of what true happiness and fulfillment is all about. It's not spending countless hours scrolling on social media. It's not comparing ourselves to others, unless you're comparing yourself to others, like we talked about, in a healthy way, where you're learning from their journey and learning from the things they've accomplished, or you believe that they can provide guidance and mentorship. We're talking about the unhealthy practices of just spending time on the wrong things, the things that add really no value in our lives. And going back to what we talked about earlier, and as we get older, you spend a little more time thinking about these things. And if you have loss in your life, or you hit an obstacle that forces you to reflect, again, those three things: time, talent, and energy. Energy can be replenished, talent can be developed, but time is one of those commodities that we spend freely every single day without ever really knowing the balance in our bank account. And so, one thing that I've been trying to spend, more time on is how I spend my time, where I invest my time, who I invest that time with. Are the things that I do in my life that are probably causing more stress, more anxiety, and unhealthy emotional reactions. Whereas, kind of going back to Mark Manson's philosophy of his, number one best-selling book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, really is about, we only have he talks about, we only have so many F's to give in this short life that we're gifted. So narrow your focus on what you actually really give a shit about. And the rest, just, put it off to the side. Like, don't spend time and emotion on things that don't matter, which really is a foundational principle of, my book, All In, because being all in is not about trying to chase every possible opportunity. It's about chasing only the right meaningful opportunities and relationships and pursuits that will have the biggest impact in your life, and more importantly, in the lives of others.
And you got to be all in with everything, right? Because I feel like if you're not all in, like you're technically you're kind of all out, right? If you will. And it doesn't mean you have to be like black and white and not be able to have nuance. Just means like when you do something, you got to commit and you got to stick to it, even when things are hard. What's your advice, for someone who starts off strong and then maybe the excitement wears off, the motivation wears off, and like, I said I wanted to like lose this weight, and or I said I wanted to do this thing. Like, what's your advice for that?
It's first going into it knowing that the excitement is 100% going to wear off. Whether it's starting a new business venture or a new fitness path or a goal to lose weight or whatever it is, like after you're like, I'm committed, and you've socialized this goal with all your key people in your life, then it gets down just to the day-to-day grind of doing that thing and pursuing that goal, which is not sexy. It's not exciting. It's actually just a lot of hard work. And so, again, going back to even what we talked about at the beginning of how I and others successfully navigate something like SEAL training, is doing those two things simultaneously, finding ways and tools and even a mentor that can, and I mean an unbiased, unemotional mentor who's going to give you good constructive feedback along the way and hold you accountable. If you don't have the mental tools yourself to hold yourself accountable, finding someone who could be essentially an accountability partner that you can check in with on a regular basis when you hit those obstacles, when things get monotonous and it's not fun or sexy anymore. It's just the day-to-day grind of doing that thing. So again, whether it's leaning on that person or whatever tools you need to maintain the emotional connection to the long-term goal, reminding yourself the positive outcomes and why you set yourself on that path in the first place, while at the same time, not just, begrudgingly finding those ways to accept the obstacles and the pain and the suffering and the stress and the anxiety, but leaning into them, becoming friends with them, knowing that it's a critical part of that journey and getting excited about those things, knowing that I have to go through these things because when I do, not only will I become mentally stronger, but, the, my mindset and the outcome of achieving this goal will feel that much better knowing that I went through all this adversity to achieve this big goal. And then guess what? You're on a whole new playing field. And the next time you set a goal, it's going to be even loftier than the tough goal you achieved the last time.
As we're wrapping this up, let's just say someone's watching or listening to this and they feel broken. Like, what do you think is the good first step for someone to not feel that way and start to become unbreakable?
I think when I'll just say we find ourselves in those moments where we feel, utterly broken, we feel a sense of hopelessness or a sense of fear, or we just don't believe that we can pull ourselves out of the mental or actual gutter that we find ourselves in. Really, and obviously, I'll always, mention leaning into or finding faith, however certain people might define that. But beyond that is really finding a way to fall back in love with yourself and believing in yourself and finding and surrounding yourself with people that will help you realize that you are a very valuable, unique individual and you have something to give to this world. And the best way to do that is realizing that when we don't make it about ourselves, or we find some sense of altruism, we find a way to give back to others, maybe others who are in the same spot that we're in or have been in, go mentor them, go lift them up. And when we start making it about someone else and not about ourselves, guess what? I know you know this, but naturally, that fear, that sense of loss, that sense of despair start to just kind of go away. Not completely, it's there still, but we make it about someone else. We don't spend all that time each day wallowing in our own misery. We're never going to get out of that rut if we do that. But one of the key ways to do that, again, not just my opinion, there's plenty of science behind this, but when we find a way to give back, find a way to make it about someone else, like for example, a lot of guys deal directly with their PTSD and obviously the more serious nature of TBI by mentoring other veterans with PTSD. And unfortunately, the way that, our brother Chris Kyle was murdered was actually giving back, and he and his buddy were mentoring a guy who had PTSD. Different story, obviously, but same way a lot of guys I know who've struggled with PTSD and depression and even, suicidal thoughts and tendencies have overcome that in ways, yes, by leaning into their faith, by getting sober, but also pouring their time and energy into other people. And not necessarily by mentoring other people, but just by pouring their time into their children, pouring their time into their marriage, pouring their time into their faith, but also in many ways, finding some way to give back is a huge way. And it's not an easy step when you're just about at what you might consider to be rock bottom, but you got to take that step. If you want to have some sense of really cherishing, the short time we have in this life and making the most of it, you got to get up and you have to take action.
What a great way to end our convo. And Brent, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your words of wisdom, your heart and everything. I think the audience can get a lot of value out of this. If people want to connect with you, if they want to read your books, where's the best place to do that?
The new book is one, obviously, we're really pushing. I really believe in the principles that have gone into this. This is very much a team effort, but the book is All In, The Pathway to Personal Growth and Professional Excellence. You can find it and pre-order it on any online retail site that you like, Amazon, obviously, Barnes & Noble and others. My company website, if you want to learn more about Accelerate, the URL is exlra.ai.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast. Like I said, I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this.
Thank you, brother. Really appreciate the time, enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Same, man. You got it.